Hello, class. This week's lecture and chapter and text are on security. And so the main job, really, besides making sure that people can use hardware and software within the company, is to protect the information and information systems in the organization from outsiders. And if you've ever seen me lecture in another class like FYS, I talk a lot about how the world is set up to take advantage of you and to take advantage of the fact that most people are very, very stupid and sometimes just ignorant about what's going on around them and how people are trying to get a hold of their money in general. So this chapter is really about sort of some general concepts like people think they're secure in using their cell phone and doing online banking when in fact they're on an unsecured wireless network that anybody could drive by and hack into and just snag their data right off the wireless network. All the way to finite concepts like how a company sets up security measures to prevent industrial hacking. And as the chapter lays out, one of the most frequent and damaging areas that data is lost, even if it's not necessarily stolen by another entity, but is lost to that organization and that company, is through employee error. That now storage devices are so powerful, you can fit so much information on just a single flash drive that somebody could load all of the company's information on a particular product line onto a flash drive and take it home to work on it and drop it into the lake outside their house or just lose it in their couch or something, and you've lost all of that data. So one of the keys to people screwing things up, which they almost certainly will do, is to provide redundancy, meaning backups. That if something goes wrong with the system or somebody loses something, that there's a backup there that you can pull from and not have to lose too much sleep over it. And so one example of this actually happening in one of my organizations was in a public library that I ran. We used some Google software on the cloud for internal communications as well as sort of marketing purposes. We used a blog for talking to each other about what was happening. Of course, people were on different shifts and some people never saw each other. And we used a Google Calendar to track what was happening in different meeting rooms and what events were going on. And then I would record videos, either talking about issues having to do with the library, like upcoming budgets, or as marketing pieces for upcoming events. And we all shared sort of one login because some of the people weren't really that tech savvy and didn't I don't want them to have to go through all these creating logins and sign-ins and having all these different sign-ins at the desk and so forth. So what happened was one person was trying to access information from home and sort of somehow rewrote over our login information and managed to delete everything out. So we lost all of the data, and Google is not particularly helpful when you've done that, when you've locked yourself out, you're lost something. So we lost a couple of years of work there that couldn't be recovered easily. So that's one example of how people can mess things up. And then when we talk about non-intentional damage to your information systems, obviously crime does pay in this field. That the major hotbed of activity is Eastern Europe. There are crime syndicates set up to target banking systems as well as just individuals who fall for stupid things like, lottery from Nigeria emails and phishing scams and that kind of thing. And industrial espionage and trademark and patent violations are a real thing in the business world. I worked for a manufacturer that had a patented and trademarked um, ductwork connection system that didn't require sealant on the external portion of the ductwork. So we would go to a trade show and would have to fend off attacks from competitors. For example, at the trade show, you weren't allowed to take photos. Well, there would be individuals from China there just snapping away like crazy in front of our booth. We would also try to swipe samples from other companies who were obviously violating our patents. They had made a similar system and were trying to sell it or sell the idea of it at the trade show. So we tried all sorts of subterfuge to get a hold of these items so that we could move forward with some legal action against them. So this stuff really goes on, and you really have to spend a lot of time thinking about how best to protect your intellectual property. So the text gets into the different types of ways that people get at your material, whether at home or at your business. They talk about alien software, so that can be anything from keystroke loggers, which are sort of measuring what you're doing and when, and using that data for marketing and sales purposes, to cookies, which are little bits of software that sit on your computer. And the sort of the positive intention is to make things go more smoothly for you, but the negative intention is that it's feeding data out to other organizations, and that leads to things like adware and so forth. So some of that is pretty benign. Other pieces of software like that are really damaging: malware, Trojan horses, those kinds of things that sometimes people will try to take down your company, if not just steal all your information. And that can lead to the most serious types of this, which is terrorism. You know, that if terrorists are able to hack into the computer systems controlling a dam, or to a nuclear plant, they could potentially cause a lot of damage and harm to that region. So it's a very real thing that security specialists have to think about. And then, of course, this is used also in, if not outright warfare, in obvious warfare between nations. So the book outlines how Russia attacked Georgia at one point, both physically with their military, but all at the same time coordinated that attack with cyber attacks on some of the government websites. So China is famous for practicing industrial espionage at a national level, hacking into some of the high-tech companies. Obviously, when Sony put out the movie The Interview, sort of making fun of North Korea, their systems were hacked and emails were released out into the public. So this stuff goes on all the time. So the key is creating information security controls to try to slow down or completely prevent these attacks. You often can't prevent everything. So really what you hear is true in regards to, you got to be careful about what you put out or what you store electronically, that it is accessible by other parties and could be used against you. And so the future of this really is in biometrics, meaning access to devices only happen by reading your retina, you're doing an eye scan, checking your fingerprints. There's already cell phones out there that instead of having to punch in a pin, it can just read your fingerprints. And so that's something that's going to continue to develop. Obviously, it can't protect everything because there's always going to be information being transferred from one location to another, often across the globe, and you can't have a biometric checkpoint throughout that whole process. So it's going to continue to be an issue for the future, and I think a very interesting topic to continue to consider. Take care.